So good evening, and I'm frozen for a change because of my computer. Anyway, I think you can still hear me. So this is our last evening of studying the book of Job. And I just want to sort of get us to where we have gotten to. Does anybody want to share with us what we've read so far? Nobody? Okay, go ahead, Christine.
Well, he got angry. He asked, well, he demanded that God come down and talk with him about it. And God berates him all over the place. And then he said, well, I'm sorry, basically, and grovels a little bit. And, but, God never apologizes for what he's been doing.
Right.
And so we're left with this, very, very jealous God, and who's been jerking Job around like crazy to win a bet. And Job's left, feeling like he's not as good as he thought he was.
Well, we're not entirely sure what his final statement is. Remember, I showed you a whole bunch of different interpretive translations. And according to Elie Wiesel, he's just simply shutting up because it's like, God, just keep talking and show what an abuser you are, right?
Yeah.
Or other people think that he just realizes, wow, God is in charge of this whole huge universe. And it's an amazing place. And we're just little tiny people here. We're not the only ones who need God to take care of us. So, shut up and remember where you are in the world, right?
Well, lesson in humility is never lost. I mean,
true.
Nice, but not the way he said it.
Right. Well, Job does go through a journey, which we'll see in the epilogue, which we're going to look at in a moment. Because remember, what was his relationship to God in the beginning of the book? How does he understand God at the beginning? Well, what did we read in the prologue? We read what he did.
Right?
Well, God God is bountiful with him. Everything is going great at the beginning of the book.
Right. And what does he do to be as pious as possible with his children? Remember?
He just
prays for them.
Lynn, go ahead.
I was going to say he follows all rituals, both for himself in terms of sacrifice as well as for her kids, just in case they did something.
Or thought something. Remember, it's about
right.
they might have even thought something wrong. Okay, so that's a relationship that is not really, kind of the best relationship we'd like to have with God, where, it's like, ooh, trembling before God. Let me make sure I do everything right. And let me, offer a sacrifice for my children in case they thought something wrong. I mean, that's really not a healthy relationship.
It's also very transactional, just like.
Very transactional.
And,
Which is what Hasatan says to God. Hey, you've done everything for him. Of course he's going to love. And it's not that he ever curses God out in his various speeches, but he certainly demands to know why he's suffering because he doesn't believe he deserves it. And of course, he's following the Deuteronomic theology. If you're punished, it should be for a reason, not because life can be random and unfair. And of course, his friends insist and get angry and angrier that you must have done something wrong. After all, nobody is perfect. And if nothing else, it is purifying to go through suffering, right? So, and God, as you said, comes out of the whirlwind and is absolutely, kind of abusive. Go ahead. Oh, Dan, did you have your hand up?
You want us to mute ourselves or not
Please,
right now?
Please, yes, please. Unless you have something you'd like to say, then you can. And as I said, I apologize for my computer because it's freezing and we can still have the class, but occasionally I won't be moving my lips. So God comes out of the whirlwind and does not explain the reason for Job going through the suffering he's going through. God just says, hey, look at my beautiful world and how big it is. And you're a pipsqueak and, you don't have the power to do the things that I can do. And Job sort of, shuts up, but we're not sure exactly what that means. The whole book is difficult to translate. There are a lot of words that are unusual and difficult. Okay, so if anyone has questions or comments before we go to the epilogue. So remember, there's a prologue in prose and there's an epilogue in prose. They were probably one piece once upon a time. And then there's the poetry, which is 30 plus chapters in the middle that was probably separate, and someone put them together. So even if you want to read the middle, which is the poetry, as a unit, and you could say, oh, well, God just says these things happen in the world, there's no explanation. Well, we know what the explanation is because we've read the prologue and someone kept it there for us. So now we have to look at the epilogue, which is tacked on. Nonetheless, that's what we have. You know, even if you say, oh, you know, different parts of the Torah or of the Bible are written by different people, somebody put them together, that's what we now have, and we have to deal with that particular edited version. So I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to begin the epilogue. So would somebody like to read? Oh, Sandy, go ahead.
After God had spoken these words to Job, God said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now therefore take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering. And my servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept his prayer, not to deal with you according to your folly. For you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has done. So Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamanite, whatever it is, went and did what God had told them and accepted Job's prayer.
Okay, so let's just stop here for a moment. What is God saying here? What if you had to paraphrase it?
Well, to me, he's saying, okay, Job has recanted his arrogance and has humbled himself before me. You have not done this. So, you know, you need to make a burnt offering to me because Job has done it the right way and you have not.
Okay, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I would say, let's have other people, any other opinions about what God is saying here?
It sounds like he's saying that the can't pronounce it.
Deuteronomic.
Yeah, that the friends have is not right. That it doesn't mean that he necessarily did something wrong.
Correct.
So that they're wrong in arguing that to him.
Right. What you're going to see over and over again with this book is that every time you think you've figured out what the theology is, it gets undercut.
Changes it.
So of course the Eliphaz and all those other guys were saying, oh, you know, you did something wrong, otherwise you wouldn't be punished. But we know we're undercutting that, knowing what the prologue has to say. Now God is kind of going, you know, well, this whole Deuteronomic thing that they're pushing is wrong, right? And Job has spoken correctly. Like, yes, I need to fight against this unfair thing. Harvey, go ahead.
Is this Eliphaz, was he one of the ones that was telling Job just, you know, bad things, that you must have done something bad and all that?
These are all the friends who have said this to him. And, you know, and they've, just one sec. Hey.
It seems to be as close as God gets to admitting he made a mistake.
Yes, to some
kind of
extent.
A politically roundabout way of making things right with Job.
Right, exactly.
But do you also think that he might be saying, I agree with you, but also you think he might be saying, well, you think you have the answers, but, you know, Job thought he had the answers too, but, you know.
Well, but God is saying Job spoke correctly.
Yeah.
Okay? Like he didn't deserve this stuff. Okay. Now he's telling the friends to take these, you know, 7 bulls and to sacrifice them, right? Which is what Job had done before, correct? Oh, my controls are way at the bottom. God, all right.
By the way, that's a hefty sacrifice. I mean, you know, that's a lot of money.
Yes, it's a lot of stuff. And, you know, it's sort of like, okay, now at the moment, we'll go further, but at the moment, it looks like what God is saying is, yeah, sacrifice to me is what you're supposed to do. That's what Job did. He sacrificed for his kids too, in case they thought something wrong. That's the correct approach to me. That seems to be what he's saying right now. But he is saying, Job is not guilty of anything. Okay, so let's go on to the next part of this.
Does God ever apologize for killing his family?
Let's see.
And
Let's see what
Job never says anything about it either, not so far.
Okay, so let's see. We're going to do one more after this, so we'll see what God has to say. Okay.
Let somebody else read.
Okay, who wants to read? Jane?
Yeah. And God restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends. And God gave Job twice as much as he had before.
By the way, the Job's prayer is about not punishing the friends for being wrong. Although, again, why would you have to punish somebody who said something that was wrong, right? I mean, they didn't do anything other than sort of harass Job. So why would they have to be punished for that? But that's another question. So now Job gets back everything except, of course, his dead children, right? Let's see what else he gets. He gets twice as much.
Yeah. Then there came to him all his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before. And they ate bread with him in his house. They showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil that God had brought upon him. And each of them gave him a piece of money and a gold ring. God blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He named the first Jemima, the second Kezia, and the third Karen Hapuch.
Okay, so God doesn't say, I'm so sorry you killed your first kids. Now you get new ones. But, that's kind of what God is doing. Like, oh, well, you lost your first few. So here's a new batch. It's pretty cold. Now he has all of this stuff. He's rewarded. That's exactly the kind of Deuteronomic theology we were fighting against. And yet in the epilogue, we're back to that. You're a good guy. You get twice as much as you had before. Now it's interesting. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And they only give the names for the daughters. Now, often women are not named. But there's a change here. And all of these are like spices, these words that are their names. They're like fragrant spices and everything. So that's kind of interesting. Someone's going to comment on that. Now, the friends do come and show him sympathy and comforted him, right? That's the first time they've done that. And this is only in the epilogue. The rest of it was like yelling and screaming. So it's a very different kind of relationship with God going on here. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And this is the last thing we're going to look at as far as, okay. You want to just finish that here?
Yeah, I have a question though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you go back to it just a sec? Okay. So all these brothers and sisters and friends come and they comforted him for all the evil that God had brought upon him. But I don't remember Job ever saying that God brought evil upon him. Did he? Did I miss something or just not remember?
Well, I guess it wasn't, it was never said explicitly in so many words, but the fact that Job is going through all this horrible stuff suggests that, it's coming from God in the sense that, God is responsible for everything. Like, okay, if you think about people suffering in the world, you think, well, why does God allow that, right? He doesn't know that God did it on purpose, right? He just knows that he's being punished somehow, and it's probably coming from God because that's how the world works. But he never said, he just said to God, come and explain yourself. Why am I going through all of this? So it's sort of,
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just say it's implicit.
Because this is, I can't tell you how much this slide is infuriating me.
Oh, believe me.
Because this is the Achilles heel of belief, of faith. This is the Achilles heel of the Holocaust. Okay, we're suffering, but we're going to be rewarded twice, three times.
You're
This is such bullshit. I can't stand it.
Yeah.
I agree with you totally.
The only part that makes sense to me is finally everybody comforts him. You know, really,
Exactly.
that makes sense. But he's never said that God brought evil on him, and if he did bring evil, then that's where Leviathan and Behemoth and all this stuff. Remember them? It's very confused to me.
Well, this is the narrator speaking, by the way.
Yeah,
right?
I know. But
so the narrator knows what's going on. Nobody else does. You know, the narrator, God, and the Hasatan, they're the only ones who really know what's going on. All Job knows is he lost his kids, he lost all his wealth, and he lost his health. And why? It's like people who say, why is this happening to me, right? People say that all the time. Why am I suffering? And the answer is, there is no answer.
Because you are.
Now, sometimes people put out bad karma and it comes back to haunt them. But, you know, if someone has, you know, ALS or whatever, that is something that is not a punishment. It feels like it, though, very often.
Well,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm really disturbed by the replaceable children. This is like really driving me nuts.
Absolutely.
It's just horrible. Oh, you lost them? Here's some more, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
They're
Right,
interchangeable.
let's look at the next little piece. Okay, Jane, if you would not mind. Oh,
Sure.
sorry, but, you know, unfortunately, yeah, there we go.
Okay. In all the land, there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father gave them an inheritance along with their brothers. After this, Job lived 140 years and saw his children and his children's children 4 generations. And Job died old and full of days.
Okay, by the way, these slides look so funny. It looks like someone poured bleach on them, but they're all digital, you know, from PowerPoint. I don't know why. I don't know. You know, who can explain anything? Okay, so, you know, this is a nice, happy ending. How do we have a happy ending like this when we're talking about the book of Job? All right, let's look at some questions that I have. Okay, so we talked a little bit about what God means when God says, you have not spoken to me the thing that is right, as my servant Job has. And we maybe have different interpretations of what that means, which is good. In the end, God restores Job's fortunes. How does this square with the book's seeming rejection of retributive justice? So again, every time, and David Klein says this, he's a scholar, he'll say every time we think we've got the theology that the book is pushing, then we get it undercut each time, you know? So why are his fortunes restored? We've just said he didn't suffer because he deserves it. Why is he deserving these rewards at the end, you know? So it's just, I think, trying to make it clear that we're not doctrinaire. Like Jews don't have doctrines, right? Christians do. You have to believe in certain doctrines. Jews, it's not doctrinaire. It's, you know, so, you know, it's undercutting anything that you want to grasp onto as your understanding of theology about how God works in the world, because there's no simple answer. What about the dead children? As you said, the dead children are not coming back to life. Do you think Job is vindicated here? What do you think?
Why is he vindicated? He didn't do anything in the wrong.
Well, yeah, and he said he demands that God come off of God's, you know, cloud up there and come down and explain God's self. And he says, I don't deserve this. So in a sense, God is saying, you know, you're right. You've not spoken of me the thing that is right. No, Job has done nothing wrong. Job has been faithful to me. I'm going to reward him. And he is kind of vindicating Job in the sense, or God is vindicating Job in the sense that, you know, God is saying, no, Job deserves good things because he's a pious, good guy, right?
What's not being mentioned, of course, with the dead children and everything is that, you know, great, he gets twice as many kids, but you know, meanwhile, Mrs. Job is like barefoot and pregnant for like 100 years. You know, I mean, it's like really
that's very
unbelievable.
That's very
it's like, oh, thanks, I get to bear 9 more children, right?
Oh
it's
my
like,
God, you're right. She's the one who has to bear all
horrible.
that. Yeah, that's very
Plus,
funny.
she's grieving for the kids that she did.
Of course she is. Of course she is.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, hopefully it's-
Are there any other comments before we go on to the?
Suzanne, I
Go
have a
ahead,
question.
Carl. Go ahead. Go ahead, Carl.
With reference to the earlier slide, when you have 14,000 sheep and 1,000 donkeys, etc., that to me is clearly preposterous. I mean, he could not possibly have owned all that livestock and fed it, taken care of it. When I saw that, I began to think of the story of Esther, which is clearly a spoof, a farce of a kind, and so I'm beginning to wonder, to what extent are we to take this story seriously? Because on one level, it seems almost like a satire of a jab at this reward and punishment stuff. If you give it a moment's thought, it's nonsensical. Obviously, good people suffer and bad people are rewarded. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. And so maybe, I'm wondering, someone is saying, hey, wait a minute, and tells this story as a kind of satire. I'm just wildly guessing here, but that's what drifts through my mind when I read stuff like this.
That's very astute. It's a fable. It's clearly not about a real person. And actually, I'll get to you, Ruth. William Wedby, who has written about Job, really does call it, a book of humor. I can't remember exactly how he characterizes it, but it is, in a sense, humorous and satirical. Just as you said, the book of Esther is similar. And you're right; those numbers are extreme. Okay, Ruth, and then Lynn. Go ahead, Ruth.
Well, just the question, wasn't this written by people, by rabbis, by scholars? I mean,
yeah,
it wasn't written by God.
No, because I think if God wrote this, God would not portray God's self in such a hideous way, because this is not a really positive portrait.
That's my point.
Yeah. Okay. Who else was gonna? Lynn.
Lynn, yeah. I'm thinking didn't Alter refer to it as primarily a folk tale that it had to have a happy ending at the end of it, so they sort of stuck that on.
Yeah, it's a folk tale. You're right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a folk tale, and I mean, it's not like humorous, ha, because here's this poor guy suffering, but it's kind of silly in certain ways. Like at the end, everything's restored and the dead kids are still dead. I mean, that doesn't really make you feel really comfortable.
It's more like Monty Python, right? It's
kind of, yeah, kind of.
Kind of mean humor, but I have a point about the daughters being named.
Yeah.
Because it is odd, but I think this is really, maybe I'm way off base here, but I think that they might be naming the daughters because it's so unusual for them to inherit on a par with their brothers. Mm-hmm. And by naming them, he's giving them rights, because otherwise they're just anonymous and they have dowries and all the rest of it. And basically he's saying, no, they have the same status as a brother, and the brothers are usually named. So, but by naming them, he's bringing them into this circle of privilege.
Well, don't forget that at the end of the book of Numbers, when Moses is dividing up the land and talking about who's going to inherit what, it's, for the men, and the 5 daughters of Zelophehad come forward and say, hey, wait a second, our father died and didn't leave a male heir. So the law gets changed. But of course, where does Job fit into all this? Let me just read you a quick thing from William Wedby. It's called The Comedy of Job. So Carl, very insightful. And this is just an abstract of it. The book of Job continues to evoke radically diverse interpretations. In particular, the problem of the dominant genre of the book has perennially challenged and frustrated interpreters. My own thesis is that when the poem of Job is set in its full and final literary context, replete with prologue and epilogue, as well as the Elihu speeches, the most apt generic designation of the book is comedy. In proposing a comic interpretation, I wish to avoid an oversimplified equation between comedy and laughter, and want rather to focus on that vision of comedy, which has at least 2 central ingredients. 1, its perception of incongruity and irony, and 2, its basic plot line that leads ultimately to the happiness of the hero, and his restoration to a harmonious society, as you said, happy ending, right, Lynn? When viewed from this perspective, Job emerges as the great reservoir of comedy, according to Christopher Fry. Thus, we find such comic elements as caricature and parody in the depictions of Job's friends, young Elihu, God, and even Job himself. Moreover, the happy ending of Job, there's something that says 3/4 here, which is not a word. Okay, long a problem for interpreters. So the happy ending of Job, long a problem for interpreters, alters the tragic movement of the book and helps to confirm its comic side. In my judgment, the category of comedy is sufficiently broad and comprehensive to embrace the wealth of disparate genres and traditions which have long been noted in the book of Job. Yeah, as he said, there's a lot of different interpretations. As we even just saw with some of the interpretations that we read about God's speech. Some people think it's a magnificent display of what the beauty of the world that God created. And some people think it's abusive. I mean, there's a range between those two poles. So, you know, not everybody thinks it's comedy the way William Wedby describes it, but it certainly is a strong option.
Mhm.
Any other comments or questions?
How do you
If
spell
that's
Wedby's
comedy.
name?
I'm sorry, Carl, go ahead.
Spell the Wedby's name?
It's J. William Wedby, Wedbee.
Wedbee.
Bee. Wait, Wedbee, Bee, yeah.
Okay.
Wedbee, J. William. So
Thank you.
good insight, good insight. Okay, so let's look at some of the interpretations. So this,
Can I ask
Go
a
ahead.
question first?
Yeah.
Is he restored to health? Or does he have like 120 years of continued misery in his body?
no, I think he's restored to health.
Okay, well, it
Yeah.
doesn't say it, so.
It doesn't
but
say it, but it's
here
like
you can have all
gets-
the cattle.
everything is coming back to him except for the dead children.
Okay.
And no one's paying attention to Mrs. Job, obviously, as usual, right? So Leo Perdue. With this new verdict, Job's integrity is not only affirmed, but the soiled righteousness of God has been rescued. Really? I mean, this guy is very, you know, into being faithful. We saw that in some other commentary that he did on the God speech. Indeed, it is the integrity of God more than Job's that is rescued by the final judgment. Because God is now doing what's right, even though God did what was wrong for a while, right? Job's struggle for justice results in the righteousness of God. Job has wrestled with God and won. And as Yahweh had contended earlier, it is justice alone that liberates the world from the oblivion of darkness, which I find this is an astonishing analysis because, we've restored, Job demanded, and God finally came around to being a mensch or somebody who does the right thing, you know, and God didn't know that all along, that this was the wrong way to behave, to make a bet at the expense of this poor guy. So anybody think this is an analysis that you feel comfortable with, or?
Well,
This is comedy.
Well, it has
This
a
is a
really
comedy.
weird sense of justice, that's for sure.
Well,
This
okay,
guy-
Ezra, what were you saying?
If this is a comedy, I prefer Jackie Mason. This book, I'm sorry to say, this book is based on your classes, which have been great. This book is a mess. This would have been rejected. This would have gotten a C- as an essay.
Right. Well,
There's no, the writer doesn't keep up with the theme. It's just,
doesn't have a through line, right?
It's just a mess.
You know, when I worked in TV, you were supposed to be able to, you know, explain your show or your documentary in one quick, you know, reader, what was it called? TV guideline that you could say in an elevator, right? And it'd be really, you'd be hard pressed to do that with this book. Okay, let's see who else. Yeah, go
My
ahead.
favorite TV guide definition or explanation for the film Svengali was teacher loves student.
Oh, God. Oh, boy.
If this book had not been part of the Bible, would we have missed anything?
Well, I think what this book does is even, the Bible, let's say, especially the Torah and the first few, books in the section of prophets, is very much about, you do what you're supposed to do, you follow the mitzvot, you will do well in life. You don't, you'll be punished. In fact, I think it was last week we had some very disturbing curses from God. God saying, if you don't obey my commandments, you're going to starve and you're going to end up eating the flesh of your children. So, that is a theology that works for some people. And that way they can explain everything. They can also feel that they have a little bit of control, because maybe if I behave myself, nothing bad will happen to me, right? This book upends everything and says, hey, that's not how it works at all. And so I think you have to take both of these together. You have to take the Deuteronomy approach and this approach and say, if you behave yourself and you're a good person, maybe things will go well. And if you're bad, maybe you'll be punished. But it doesn't always work that way. And I mean, I looked at, I talked, I think last week, about the fact that the second paragraph of the Shema, which the Reform movement took out, says, if you obey my commandments, all will be well. And if not, you're going to starve. But if you look at it environmentally, if we don't obey God, not in the sense of, clicking our heels and doing the mitzvot because God said so, but in terms of how we care for the land, how we respect each other, if we follow those mitzvot, maybe the earth won't be at the point it is now, which is, it might burn up in 30 years, right? And if we treated each other better, maybe a lot of the problems we have in our society wouldn't be happening. So it's not so much that God is going to punish you, it's that if you obey commandments and follow what the Torah suggests as an ethical lifestyle, if we all followed it, maybe our lives would be far better than it is. So I don't think we need to reject Deuteronomy as long as we think of it more metaphorically. But then there's ALS. Then there are the cruel people who will be willing to kill other people for one reason or another. I mean, there are all these other factors that come into the equation, and we have to be able to say, yeah, sometimes we can't explain it. Somebody asked me the other day why their husband died. Why him? Why not somebody who's already, let's say, on death row? How do I explain that, right? Now, if somebody gets shot, I could say, well, it's because we don't respect each other, because there's mental illness out there that we haven't been addressing, et cetera, et cetera. And that's on society. So I like having this book in there because I think it gives you a fuller picture of what life is like. I don't know if anyone agrees with me, but does that make any sense, Ezra?
I think it makes sense, but I don't think it adds anything to the overall theme of the Bible, which I think you just explained very well.
Thank you.
Which is that you will have a happier life if you follow these rules.
Yeah, as long as everyone else is
it isn't a guarantee.
Right.
But
the problem is, if you follow the rules and no one else does, then you're going to have to, of course, pay the price. Go ahead, Christine. Go ahead.
I think there's also what I could pull out of it with everybody's help. This course has been wonderful. Is that it's also, there's a subtext of, we have to take care of each other. We have to be responsible to each other and care for each other, because his friends are not doing that. And toward the end, they come around and they are doing it, and so on and so forth. And that it's through our actions toward each other, not just in ritual, that we discover what a different kind of God is.
I think you're absolutely right. And I had gone into the book trying to understand why bad things happen to good people. And I came away with a different answer to a different question, which is, I'll get to you, Lynn, in one sec. It's okay. So to me, the book answers the question of how, not why, how you respond to the evil going on in your life. And it's what happens at the end when the friends actually come and comfort him and don't say to him, you must have done something wrong. Or what, a lot of times people say things like, oh, God doesn't give you any more than you can handle. And, now this person is up, with God or whatever. Those are not helpful at all for most people. So the best thing you can do is to just be with the person and be a listening ear. And by the way, the idea of coming to someone who's in mourning and not saying anything comes from the book of Job.
Mhm.
That's what we're supposed to do when we go make a Shiva call. You don't go in and start talking. Let the person talk. All right, Lynn.
I'm just thinking its place, the fact that it's in the Bible, I think its role is, for me, just to make you question the Deuteronomic theology.
Yeah,
Well, it's not really like that, and just
so.
let it go at that.
Right. It's sort of, like I said, we looked at a piece from the Talmud, which is Yisurin shel Ahava, which are tribulations out of love. And the rabbis postulate this thing of if you've done enough Torah study, if you've been a good person and you're still suffering, it's because God is imposing these on you out of love, and you should accept it with love because it's purifying to go through this. And God only tests strong people, And then when 3 rabbis are sick and their friends come to visit them and say, are you accepting this out of love? And they say, no. Okay. So it's nice to have a theology, but then try, putting it into practice when you're going through something, right? All right. So let's look at the next commentator, Edwin Good. So Edwin Good says, they consoled and comforted him about all the evil that Yahweh had brought upon him, which is exactly what they should be doing. The closing tale lays the responsibility for Job's suffering squarely on Yahweh, Yahweh being the God of Israel. And that's how scholars refer to God, because it's a way of reading Yud He Vav He, which is God's name, with vowels. And it shows that the solution to it is provided by Job's brothers, sisters, and acquaintances. The 3 friends had no solution. Comfort about the meaning of suffering is not found in debates and truths about theology or theory of the matter, nor in divine descriptions of the working of the cosmos. That was God's speech. Look at this cosmos. Well, that's not comforting. Comfort comes to Job in the presence of family and friends who acknowledge the source of the trouble and console the sufferer by their presence. So this is, to me, what the book answers. How do you deal with suffering? You come and comfort people, not with stupid, platitudes or cliches, but by your very presence, which is something I'll have to tell you, I had to learn when I did chaplaincy training, because I tend to want to fix things for people. Oh, why don't you try this or that? And, the best thing you can do is just be there with the person and let them speak. Tell me about your loved one, that kind of thing. And it's a hard discipline to, when you want to help people to just hold back, right? Do we have any comments from anybody else about, anybody want to say something?
Well, go ahead, let Christine go first.
No, go ahead, Carl.
Well, thank you. So stepping back from Ezra's comment, yes, Job is full of all kinds of problems, and so is the Bible. It's historically ridiculous. It's full of superstition, theological problems, on and on and on. But like it or not, it is the foundational document of Western civilization. And I think if we want to be connected to our peers, not just in the Western world, but everywhere, because they all have documents like this that are problematic, but to which they adhere, I think it behooves us to try and understand it and to grapple with it. It is full of nonsense, BS even, but it's also has a great deal of wisdom. And like I said, I think it just, part of being human is to grapple with these issues. And while though they are, life is full of these conundrums. Life is full of, just look at the newspaper, it's full of superstition and nonsense, but we have to deal with it. And so in a sense, Job and the Bible and the Torah generally, the Bible generally speak to these issues. It is a perfect document because it is so imperfect. Our lives are imperfect, so deal with it.
And actually, you know what? This is considered part of wisdom literature, even though some people may find it devoid of wisdom. Christine, go ahead.
I was thinking as you were saying about the, learning to listen, that we have to, if you have to do with children who have experienced major trauma, and God knows there are like several billion children in the world who have, and one of the things that I had to go through with the teaching staff at my daughter's schools is that there's a huge difference between acting out of a tantrum, right, and a flashback. And in the case of a tantrum, you set clear boundaries and the timeouts and whatever else. Okay, fine. That's not a flashback. A flashback is getting out of your body and back to that horrible place. Okay, and for a flashback, if the child's small enough, you can just, and they're used to you, hugging and stuff like, and them hugging you, you just hold them gently and help reassure them that they are loved, and you're helping them call their spirit back from the bad place. It's a really different thing, but you're not giving directives, you're not judging, you're not doing anything else. It's not about obedience. It's about being in a terrifying space and having somebody who's facilitating you healing yourself.
So how are you relating this to Job?
Because basically what he's trying to do is, his family is trying to comfort him and just be there for him and so on. And the friends are treating him like he's having a tantrum, that he caused this and that he should get himself into timeout for a while.
Good analogy. Good analogy. Very nice. Okay. Anybody else before we go on with Ilana Pardes? No, everybody okay? All right, we're going to look at Ilana Pardes.
Rabbi Singer?
Yes.
Are these commentators Jewish or Christian?
Leo Perdue and Edwin Good are Christian. Ilana Pardes is Jewish. Bill Wedby is Jewish. We're going to look at something that he wrote. And Aviva Zornberg is Jewish.
Thank you.
Carl Jung is not Jewish. And I think I told you last time what his conclusion is, but I'll repeat it when we get there. Okay, so here's Ilana Pardes. So the exchange between Job and his wife, and later between Job and his friends, regardless of how hostile these dialogues tend to be, marked the beginning of Job's growing interest in human relations. This tendency reaches its peak in the Epilogue. The book of Job thus makes clear that an intense dialogue with God does not preclude other dialogues. On the contrary, it enhances an openness to other modes of intimacy and is in turn enriched by them. Once Job is able to let go of his insistence on a rigid view of God's relationship to humankind, he discovers a far more intricate mode of faith, a faith which relies on an ongoing quest. So let's just unpack that for a minute before we go on to the next page. So apparently, he has a very, as she says, rigid concept of God. You do your sacrifices, you do whatever, you get rewarded, you do something wrong, you get punished. That's not really a mature relationship. So at the end, even during these, many chapters of his arguing with his friends, at least he's engaging with them. It seems like he wasn't really engaging with people before. And he realizes that, faith is not about I am certain that God does things this way or that way, which he was certain of. He believes in Deuteronomy. I don't deserve this. I shouldn't have it. But he's learning through this whole experience and these exchanges and the exchange with God that that's not what faith is. Faith isn't static. It grows, it changes. And he's learning that in the course of this. And then let's look at the next page. Christine, did you have something you want to add?
If you'll indulge me.
I'll indulge you.
It always struck me reading, this is about the fourth time I've read the book of Job, and I'm sure everybody else has read it 20 times, but it strikes me every time I read it that at the end, he has more wisdom than God. He's like coped with the issues of his own arrogance and so on and so forth. And meanwhile, God is like unapologetic, and he's like this way and that way about Deuteronomy, and he's just going to leave it a mess for everybody else. And I, Job, not through his suffering, but through his struggle against this rigid view, has become more nuanced and more caring.
Absolutely.
And God has not grown.
Well, it's interesting when you think about, okay, our relationship with God. Our relationship with God is one that it's supposed to be somewhat mutual. We have a covenant with God. And as I may have mentioned at another point, Walter Brueggemann, who's a Christian theologian, said it's like a dance. Sometimes one leads and sometimes the other. And so the idea that God can learn from human beings is not, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a very rich kind of relationship. And then, of course, Jung will say that because in this case, people were more moral than God, God needs to learn what he was missing from human beings and then becomes incarnated in Jesus Christ in order to learn from human beings. Okay, yeah, so I didn't include that part of his statement because, this is not a Christian class, but that's where he ends. He's got a book called Answer to Job, if anybody is interested. So he says, God has to learn from human beings, and so God has to become a human. Not, something that I feel all that, wonderful about, which, as I said, I didn't include that in this. So let's see Ilana Pardes's next page. Okay. So Job's relation to women undergoes a significant change. The man who rebuked and silenced his wife, remember that? She says, curse God and die. And he says, quiet woman, right? Later expressed continual anger at the female body that gave birth to him because he curses the day he was born. He never curses God directly, but he curses the day he was born. Now behaves differently. He names his 3 daughters. This is actually the only place in the Bible where a father names his daughters. Job endows his daughters with captivating names which match their renowned beauty. Bright day or dove for one, a type of perfume for another one, and a black powder used to beautify the eyes in the third case. They speak of a new world Job has discovered, a world of beauty, of fragrance, of cosmetics, of feminine grace. Job expresses his respect for his daughters also by providing them with property. So he has developed a different relationship with God and with human beings and with the feminine. Maybe even recognizing there's a feminine side to him too. Christine, you don't look happy with that statement.
No, please no. First of all, let's get beyond the objectification of the female body. But instead of making amends to his wife, he only treats his subordinate, daughters are subordinate, they're the next generation down. So only in the role of the father, i.e. reinforcing patriarchy, can he be magnanimous.
Yeah, well, let's not expect too much of him. He does name the daughters and he does give them property, which is more than he did before. And it's more than any other father has done. Right? We've been reading about King David in our Tanakh study.
Yeah.
He didn't give his daughters a name, nor did he protect his daughter from being raped by one of his sons.
And at least this way they can leave their husbands, like women in the Arabic world have been able to do until modern times. They received their portion, and that was kept separate from the husband's portions.
Mhm.
That was a dowry only in name, that she controlled it. It was her nest egg for flight.
Well, that's like the ketubah. The ketubah guarantees a certain amount of property to the woman.
Precisely.
Exactly,
Yeah.
in case of a divorce or a death. So, I think one of the things in here, aside from the issue of theodicy, of evil in a world where God is supposed to be all powerful and all just, and the issue of theology, we're also looking at what kind of relationship with God is a mature relationship. And it's not about being so scared that you're constantly making sacrifices, either because you think you've done something wrong, or maybe somebody had a bad thought. It's a much richer kind of dialogue. And it sort of spills over into how you treat people, right? Because I don't really care what your idea of God is. It's how are you behaving in the world based on that, right? I mean, not to single out one particular religious denomination, but the Southern Baptist Council, or whatever they're called, just released a report, which I heard something about it on the radio. I mean, people who are supposedly representing God, who not only harassed and went over the line with women, but with children. So, these are people who will say, we believe in God and, Bible thumping and the whole thing. Well, how are you behaving in the world? That's way more important. And as Harold Schulweis, Rabbi Harold Schulweis said, when people ask me, am I kind? I say, no, they ask me if God is kind. I say, are you kind? If people ask me if God is just, I say, are you just? I mean, that's the thing about Judaism. It's how you are going to behave in the world, not what your beliefs are. Because you can believe everything you want and then act like a jerk. So, and nobody's immune from that. It's not just the Southern Baptists, unfortunately. I wish it were, but it's, all pervasive in our society, not just our society, many societies. All right, let's take a look at, now I'm going to share something that William Wedby actually wrote. It's not about the comedy per se, but as you can see, his book is called The Bible and the Comic Vision. The poet puts his readers in a privileged position. We know what neither Job nor his counselors know, that Job is afflicted because of a chain of events that occurred in a mysterious divine council. This fact throws the whole ensuing dialogue into extreme tension and creates one of the fundamental incongruities of the entire book. The knowledge gained in the prologue shows the major debate to be misplaced and wide of the mark. The happy ending, in my view, demonstrates the ultimate irony and comedy of Job, where the problems are not fully and satisfactorily resolved, where the contradictions and incongruities remain. So this is part of his definition of comedy, not comedy ha ha ha, but comedy as in irony. Oh, wait. We've got this, most of the book is like 30 plus chapters of poetry of Job saying he's completely innocent, of the friends saying you aren't. And none of it makes any sense because we already know something very different. We know that this is about a bet. Okay, any comments on Bill Wedby before we go to the next commentator? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay. Yeah, if my computer would respond, I could, we're going to look at the questions first. Okay. So we kind of went over a lot of this stuff already, but how has Job changed? Is it for the better? I think so. Has the book of Job solved the problem of evil in the world? What do you people think? All right, we'll go through all the questions and then I'll see if you have answers. What does the book of Job suggest about dealing with evil? What kind of relationship is being promoted between human beings and God? What theology is being advanced by the book of Job? What question does the book of Job actually answer? Okay, any thoughts about any of this from anybody?
I don't think that the book solves the problem of evil in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because it isn't evil in the world that started this.
Exactly.
It was that in the divine world.
Exactly.
So it really does not address evil in the world and how you deal with evil in the world. What Job is dealing with is a bet that he doesn't even know about.
Right,
Mhm.
right. So what kind of theology do you think it's promoting?
The theology of the absurd.
Yeah, I think you're right to some extent. I mean, listen, it's like, the Untitled Chapter at the high holidays, who shall live and who shall die? Like God's going to decide, okay, this year you're going to die of cancer. You're going to be drowned in a flood. Okay, horrible, horrible, horrible theology. And some places don't even read it. But the fact is, sometimes it feels that way, right?
Mhm.
And there's things out of our control. You can call
That's
it
it.
God, you can call it something else. And how do you cope with that? How do you deal with it? And I think it's trying to say, it's not about a simple equation, because as I think previously, we looked at one commentator saying, if it's a Deuteronomic theology, then God's hands are tied. God does not have any freedom to behave, right? I mean, not behaving like a human being, but, if you're bad and you get punished, or you're good and you get rewarded, then that it's just a very, simplistic
Very limited.
equation that God can't say, well, you know what? You deserve to be punished, but I'm not going to punish you. And again, I'm not trying to make God anthropomorphic, but it's just the way we can talk about God. God wants, in the stories that we've talked about, God likes to have some chesed, some loving kindness, counterbalancing God's din, God's judgment. So if everything is done according to a very simple equation, then God can't ever exercise a different approach. Yes, Christine.
I think well, I don't even know if it's a theology, but it's basically, arguing that there are some things that we can't know.
Mm-hmm.
We're not privileged to it.
Right.
May not even be an answer. And we're living in this extremely ambiguous setting. And all we can do is to focus on what we can accomplish with each other.
Right.
And to show respect for what we don't understand. But not obedience per se.
Right.
And I don't know if that's even a theology, or rather than just an ethical conduct.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a second because I need to rejigger this thing back here. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next person, which is Aviva Zornberg. Let me get it. Next, here we are. Okay. I don't feel as bad as I would be feeling about all this mess of my computer, because I was on the Zoom call before and they were having problems too. So it's not just me. Okay, so Aviva Zornberg is a modern Orthodox scholar, and she lives in Jerusalem. Her father was at one point the head rabbi of Scotland. So she's quoting May Hashtiloach, which is a rabbi who's known as the Ishbitzer. Jacob sought to dwell in peace. Peace obtains when a person behaves in such a way as to keep far from all doubt and guards himself from any evil act. God told him that as long as a human being lives in bodily existence, it is impossible to behave with extreme wariness and fear and humility. For God wants human acts, and in this world, human beings must act in love in ways that are not completely clarified. She says in this reading, she's talking about Jacob, but it applies. In this reading, Jacob's desire based on cognitive certainty and moral scrupulousness, which the Ishbitzer calls fear and humility, is countered by God's insistence on the tragic nature of existence in this world. What is most needed is not fear, but love, the capacity to act in a world where absolute clarity is not obtainable. So, unfortunately, we would like to have absolute clarity, but we cannot have it. That's just, I mean, even just in the story of Job, you've got this divine counsel going on that, Job doesn't know about. He'll never know about it. Even when God comes into the whirlwind and talks to Job, God never explains, by the way, we just have this counsel up there, and this is what we decided to do to you. So there's going to be mystery in the world. And being afraid of the mystery is not going to get us anywhere. We have to have the capacity to act with love, which is what the friends eventually do. So I think this is a nice sort of way of sort of wrapping up what happens in the epilogue. You know, the world is going to only exist based on chesed, on loving kindness. It's not going to exist on other things like fear. Okay, how do I? All right, now our friend Jung. Get this thing out of the way. Okay. He says, Yahweh, without reason, has let himself be influenced by one of his sons, by a doubting thought, and made unsure of Job's faithfulness. I mean, it's really hard to understand that God could be so insecure, but apparently in the story, God is. With his touchiness and suspiciousness, the mere possibility of doubt was enough to infuriate him and induce that peculiar double-faced behavior of which he had already given proof in the Garden of Eden, when he pointed out the tree to the first parents and at the same time forbade them to eat it. So, you know, why do you tell them don't eat this very specific tree or the fruit of the tree? Because there are so many trees in that Eden, nobody would have ever noticed that particular tree, but God says don't eat that one. Similarly, his faithful servant Job is now to be exposed to a rigorous moral test quite gratuitously and to no purpose, although God is convinced of Job's faithfulness and constancy, and could moreover have assured himself beyond all doubt on this point had he taken counsel with his own omniscience. So if God is omniscient, which means God is all-knowing, why did God have to put this guy through this test? God could have just consulted with God's self and said, oh yeah, he is a very faithful guy. From the human point of view, Yahweh's behavior is so revolting that one has to ask oneself whether there is not a deeper motive hidden behind it. What does man possess that God does not have? And I'm giving you exactly how it's written, so man and him and all of that, but I didn't fix his English. Could a suspicion have grown up in God that man possesses an infinitely small yet more concentrated light than he, Yahweh, possesses? So what Jung is suggesting is God realizes, human beings have gotten to a place that's actually superior to mine on some level. I need to find this out myself. Shrewdly, Job takes up Yahweh's aggressive words and prostrates himself at his feet as if he were indeed the defeated antagonist. Guileless as Job's speech sounds, it could just as well be equivocal. He has learned his lesson well. Formerly, he was naive, dreaming perhaps of a good God or of a benevolent ruler and just judge, that God would be faithful and true, or at least just. But to his horror, he discovers that Yahweh is in certain respects less than human, right? Because when Job is screaming and yelling, saying, God, come down and explain yourself, he's assuming God is just and good and is going to explain what is happening in a way that is acceptable, which is not what happens at all. So what Jung is saying is when Job prostrates himself, it's an act because he knows that's all he can really do with this particular God. But he's not necessarily accepting this. Yahweh's behavior is the behavior of an unconscious being who cannot be judged morally. I think it should be say one can submit to such a God only with fear and trembling, and can try indirectly to propitiate the despot with unctuous praises and ostentatious obedience. That was the relationship that Job had in the beginning, right? I'm going to give you sacrifice. I'm going to do what you need, blah, blah. And then at the end, oh, you are just a wonderful, wonderful God, and I have nothing more to say. But a relationship of trust seems completely out of the question to our modern way of thinking. Nor can moral satisfaction be expected from an unconscious nature God of this kind. The victory of the vanquished and oppressed is obvious. Job stands morally higher than Yahweh. In this respect, the creature has surpassed the creator. That's pretty bold. So let's see how people feel about that. Job is morally superior to God. as I said, the conclusion will be incarnation in the person of Jesus to learn those lessons, but we're not going there. Okay, Christine.
I just reread, because I was cleaning up my room, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I found it, and what do you do when you find a book? You read it, and it's very much along the lines of Jung's argument that basically, at the end, it's very clear that the so-called monster is far more human and self-reflective and more trustworthy, even though he has murdered, than the creator. So I thought that was pretty interesting. It's very parallel to what Jung is saying.
Mm-hmm. How do other people feel about what Jung is saying? I mean, we don't have to go to the incarnation in Jesus. I mean, this is not a class in Christianity, but I think what he says he's very psychologically astute, as we know, Carl Jung. And I think, yeah, I mean, there's something called process theology, which is that God evolves. God is not, Maimonides would not like this at all, because Maimonides believes that God is perfect and doesn't change ever, which is why you can't attribute to God any attributes that are positive, because then they could change. This is a very different concept, that process theology of God evolving. And it depends, of course, on what you mean by God. If God is, let's say, the unity of all life, of course, we're all changing and evolving as time goes on, right? If you believe that God is somebody sitting on a cloud, then that's a different way of understanding God's evolution. Did you want to say something, Christine?
The San people, or the Kalahari, have, well, of course, they've been missionized by every sect in the universe of Christianity, but in their systems of thought prior to missionization, their view of a creator being was that it was inherently evil because it was trying to control things that no one should try to control.
Interesting. Jane, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I really like Jung's explanation. I mean, that makes sense to me. Yogi Brandes, who I've talked about, she's an ultra-Orthodox Jew. She would also agree with him that God evolves. God was young, and she takes his experiences with 7 different biblical characters and shows that they actually changed his behavior. And certainly just from our Torah study, we've seen examples where God's behaviors changed, like when he wanted to destroy the Hebrew people and with the golden calf, and Moses appeals to his vanity and says, well, if you do this, all the other gods are going to laugh at you. Nobody's going to take you seriously from now on. And I think there's a rabbinical tale, a midrash about a debate between Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai's school, something to do with an oven. I've never really.
Yeah. It's actually not actually those two.
And God says, "Oh, you guys are smarter than me.
Yes,
you outwitted me."
Yes, it's actually Rabbi Eliezer and the majority of rabbis who disagree about whether the oven is kosher or not. And Eliezer is usually right. And he says, if I'm right, let this tree fall over. If I'm right, let the river go backwards. It does all that. And even a voice from above says, Eliezer is right. But the majority says, we're making the decisions now. God laughs and says, my children have defeated me. My children have defeated me. It's a great story. Great story. So, yeah, I mean, also, I would recommend a book called God, a Biography by Jack Miles.
Great book.
So I always want to say God, an autobiography, but no, this is the autobiography, the Bible. Yeah, but Jack Miles was I think he's still alive. I don't know, but he was a reporter for the LA Times or columnist, and he also knows a lot about religion, and he looks at God as a literary character throughout the Bible and how it evolves. So but that's from a literary point of view, not from a religious point of view. All right, I want to share with
He
you.
died recently.
Oh, he died?
In the
Okay.
last few years, he
Okay.
died.
May his
Not
memory be a
of
blessing.
Old age. Old age.
Yeah. So, well, he wrote the book several decades ago. It's really excellent. It's really, really excellent. So there's also a book called Congregation, which are essays based on different parts of the Bible by people who are academics or whatever. They're not religious. And Leslie Fiedler, who's a scholar in English literature, wrote an essay about Job. And what he says is that every time he's read Job at different times of his life, he's taken something different from it. And you know, it made a certain kind of sense to him when he was young, and then when he was middle-aged, it made different kind of sense, and then he was older. So I'm going to just share a little piece of the ending of his essay, but that's a really excellent book as well. So here is the final clue to the meaning of the mystery of the wager with the adversary being Hasatan, remember, not Satan, but the prosecuting angel, to whom we were first introduced standing at ease with his fellow B'nai Elohim before the heavenly throne. B'nai Elohim are basically the angels, children of God. It is with himself that God is betting. That's kind of what was suggested by, was it Jung who just suggested that? He should have checked with his own omniscience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's with himself that God is betting, with his own other side, from which he cannot otherwise exercise the suspicion that no man, not even Job, his perfect servant, does good for nothing. It is this nagging doubt which entices him into making the cruel test whose outcome we tell ourselves he surely knows from the start, right? If God is omniscient, wouldn't God know what's going to happen at the end of this experiment? But then, like him, perhaps, we remember how Adam, similarly tempted, fell. Certainly, ever since that mythological event, which is to say, since mankind first knew good from evil, we've been haunted by doubts about our own virtue, which we project in fear and trembling upon our maker. There's one more slide, but I just want to make sure we understand what he's saying here. So Job is being sort of tempted in a sense, not by saying, here's a beautiful fruit that'll give you wisdom, don't eat it. But here, let me give you the worst things that could happen to you in life. Are you still going to love me? Okay. Now, in Adam's case, Adam didn't, he failed the test because he was tempted and he fell. But what Fiedler is saying is God is having a discussion with God's self, which is really a discussion we're having with our own selves that we project onto what we consider to be God, right? Because anything in the Bible that's been written about God is our point of view. It's not God's point of view because we don't know how God thinks. We are projecting our own values, issues, questions, fears, and all that onto this character that we call God. Doesn't mean God doesn't exist, but we know very little about what God is or isn't because we're human beings. We only have very limited consciousness. So it's a question that we're talking about ourselves. You know, how virtuous are we? After all, Job is a work written by man and not God, as I just said. It should be read, so it seems to me, as a revelation, psychological rather than theological, that we want to be thus tempted by God, want the doubt about ourselves, which we attribute to him, to be resolved in our favor. Only after this, in the wish dream, which constitutes the true heart of Job, comes a long-awaited happy ending. So in a sense, we were sort of talking about how this is a folktale and a comedic folktale because it ends happily ever after. Well, we like to tell ourselves stories that end happily ever after. Think of all the Hollywood movies that end happily ever after, because we want to believe that. We want to believe that, yes, we're virtuous. Yes, we don't have to be given stuff by God to be virtuous and good. At this point, however, we pass from the mystery of evil to the even greater mystery of restoration, which I must confess I have as yet barely begun to understand. So Leslie Fiedler needs a few more decades before he'll understand that part of the book. I suspect indeed that I never shall, unless, like Job, but God forbid that I pay the price, I'm granted a double 70 years and 10 in addition to those I've already lived. Until then, therefore, I am moved like him to lay my hand upon my mouth and to repeat his penultimate vow of silence, which finally, to be sure, he did not keep. Once I've spoken, yea, twice, but I will proceed no further. He does speak again after that, after saying that. So Leslie Fiedler is saying, this is really a story about our own self-doubt. And we like to end it happily because we want to believe that we're virtuous. Now, this business at the end of God restoring everything, he does not even pretend to understand, certainly not yet, maybe in another 30 years. So any thoughts about Leslie Fiedler's understanding of this book and what it actually is exploring, which is very different from what we've seen from all the theologians, right? Because he's not a theologian. He's looking at it psychologically. So what do you think about it being a projection of our own doubts? You think so, Lynn?
I'm all for that.
Yeah.
I mean, I get the feeling from the various questions and comments that have been raised is that the book of Job is very disturbing. It's made us rethink a lot of things. It certainly has made me rethink my notion of God.
In what sense? Tell us how it's.
Well, to make a long story very short, I was brought up as an atheist, and I became interested in Judaism when I was in my 30s. I mean, I was brought up as a cultural Jew, but as a secular Jew. And I made a decision that I wanted to see what would happen if I embraced the Jewish faith. So one day I just said to myself, I remember this, I was in a car, I was a passenger, and I looked in the mirror, the side mirror, and I said, okay, from now on, I'm going to believe in God. I wonder where that will take me.
Interesting.
But the God that I believed in is very much our stereotypical God, and this has destroyed every illusion I ever had about this typical God that I believe in. So I've really gotten down to the basics. I believe there's something out there, for want of a better name, we can call it God. But it's just, to me at this point, an energy force that creates.
Okay.
I'm not even sure that this energy force destroys. So, and the basis for all my thinking, believe it or not, is the Human Genome Project, because there's just too much mapping, there's too much rationality, there's too much there that cannot be explained by, oh, this was just a random, this just randomly happened, all of these electric forces in the universe. So I'm starting from the Human Genome Project and going from there. And it's a very, very slow build.
Okay, that sounds
I'm not sure I'm never going to have a complete view of God again. But right now, it's just energy that creates.
great.
That I know. That and the creation, this mapping is in everything. It's in frogs, it's in humans, it's in trees, it's in, everywhere. So that's where I'm starting.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Christine.
I can go some part of that way with you, Jane.
Mhm.
It's just that, as long as you don't take it toward intelligent design, because nobody who's ever had a period or hemorrhoids would ever confuse the plumbing with intelligent design. And also there's too much ambiguity in the genome. There's a tremendous amount of stuff that really, really subtle interactions with environments uterinely and stress. I mean, there's just so much that really they pretend they know what the genes do, And the answer is it's so variable.
Mhm.
And, there are 53 ways of being intersex, you're going to pin these all down, no, they're not going to, because they're subtle and they're interactive and they have their,
And once
you know,
again, I don't think
yeah.
that's random. I don't think that's accidental.
Well, let me offer
but
the
yeah.
notion that creation itself,
Uh-huh.
creative being means that it's potentiality
Right.
Yeah,
rather than certainty.
right.
By the
right.
way, folks, speaking of God, I think next year, I have a lot of stuff in the fall that's planned. I sent out my tentative draft for adult ed. So the
looks
fall is
great.
completely filled already. I think I'm going to do a few sessions on God, on different ideas of God and Judaism. And actually, Jane is going to contribute one session to that. Right, Jane?
Absolutely. More if people want
That'd
it.
be great.
Lynn,
Yeah.
did you want to share something?
I was, off of what Jane was saying, I just sort of accepted that I think there's probably something out there. I know what I believe it's not, like the God that sits up, judges and knows everything, all that. But beyond that, I don't know. And I've just accepted that that's good enough. What counts is how you behave, period.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to share their reaction to any of these? Go ahead, Mickey.
My takeaway from this is I believe in God, but I don't believe the important thing is me having a relationship with God. It's having a relationship with other human beings, which is
Nice.
most important.
Nice.
And
I agree totally.
so,
And I think that's what the conclusion of the book of Job is that, we're not going to really ever understand God or God's ways or why the world is the way it is. So we can be there for each other. I think that's, the main conclusion, right?
I think it's very interesting that we have to name an ambiguous presence. It's like so human to like have to name it to bring it into our world.
As we know, when you name something, you sort of get some control over it. And we want to control God, like, okay, this is how you're supposed to act. These are the rules. What are you doing? You're not doing it the way you're supposed to, right?
Can I just make one comment to Mark and Mickey?
Sure.
Thank you for flying your flag. I've been watching it, in back a little bit. Happy June.
That's right.
Oh, I
Thanks.
didn't even see it. Wait, where? I don't see a flag. Oh, there. Oh, I see the edges of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have our little one up front, because I don't want people to firebomb our house.
Oh, God. Jeez. So, does anybody else want to say something about the book and how it's affected you or change? Harvey? No?
Yes, I had, my first thought is, when was this written and who wrote it? And second, it's like most of the mythological pieces are supposed to give us some kind of a lesson, not necessarily making the assumption that they're real. And I think to say that it's a real story, I think people go beyond
No.
it really is. It's a mythology. And what is it we're supposed to be learning about it? People wrote it, and people are trying to make a point. And I'm not sure if they're trying to make a point that you better be good or else, because it's kind of random. And if God doesn't like you for some reason, wants to test you, you're in deep doo-doo. Or is it there's just doesn't matter, what's going on. I mean, you could live the most wonderful life and still not, have a good life. You could have some horrible things happen to you. It's like, when good people have bad things happen to them, so. But I'm not sure what the mythology really is supposed to mean here.
Okay, so just, it was written between the 7th and the 4th centuries BCE, which is quite a big range, but they obviously don't know. And I think it's important to understand the book on its own, but also to look at it in the context of the Bible, Okay, why was that included? Why were certain books included, and what were the rabbis trying to do by including it? And I do think that, the Deuteronomy of, you need to obey and do all that. Part of it is control of society, right? We want people to behave themselves.
Right, yeah, a lot of what's written in the Bible seems to control the population.
Yes.
Get the people to do what you want them to do.
Exactly.
And these are the rules, and you better do it, or else there's going to be this deity in the sky that's going to come down and put wrath on you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sandy.
You're muted.
He's having trouble unmuting, I think.
I'm not having trouble, I just forgot.
Oh.
I'm thinking about some of the Christian, I brought it up before, the preachers who say that the terrible things that happen in the world are because of the sin in the world. And they
Right.
try to tie them together, which to me just doesn't float.
Right. Well, I think that's why the book of Job is there, is to say that's not how it works. It does sometimes, but not always. It's in conversation with the rest of the Bible. And as I mentioned, I think this is the last time in our Hebrew Bible that God actually appears. So think about that. The last speech that God ever gives to anybody is a speech out of the whirlwind, which is basically saying, I'm big and strong and you're a pipsqueak. So that's interesting, right? And then you get the Song of Songs and you get all these other books and there's no God in there. And read Jack Miles on that one.
Mm.
Yeah. So I think we're just about done. Any last comments that anybody would like to make or questions?
Well, I want to thank you, Rabbi, for really a fascinating series. I mean, when I
You're
joined up, but I thought, yeah, this is just going to be boring.
Oh,
It's been anything but.
I'm glad. I'm glad. Well, it's been great having you. I really appreciate the comments people have made because it enriches our discussion. And we do have Tanakh study on Saturday morning.
Morning.
King Solomon.
Great Job, Rabbi.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
this is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank
Well,
you,
I'm so glad
everyone.
you're all-
Thank you.
And
very
thank
much.
you. Yeah, exactly. My wonderful group of friends here.
Yeah.
It's like so smart.
Is this the last